Danganronpa V3 is out on PS4, Vita, and PC this month, and it's the third installment in the popular Japanese visual novel adventure series from Spike Chunsoft. Play the killing game once again that brings out the hope, death, and of course despair among the ultimates. It's really difficult to talk and describe the story without mentioning finite details or referencing certain events that give away spoilers. For that reason, I'm going to try to be very brief and vague with the plot details while also blurring out the text dialogue in the gameplay shown in this review, just to try to keep this review as spoiler free as I can. In Danganronpa V3, the government has labeled certain gifted people with amazing talents as ultimates. One day, 16 ultimates from around the world wake up and are imprisoned in the Ultimate Academy for Gifted Juveniles. In this academy, the headmaster is a bear named Monokuma, who along with his 5 Monokuma cub children, pressure the 16 ultimates into a killing game. In order to escape this locked off secluded academy, the ultimates need to commit and get away with murder without being caught by their fellow classmates. If they succeed, the murderer or Blacken will graduate and will be set free, while the rest of the ultimates are executed. However, once a murder happens, a class trial will be set that will give everyone a chance to gather evidence and investigate who the Blacken is. If the Blacken is revealed during the trial, then they'll be executed instead. If you played any main entry in the Danganronpa series before, you'll know the story set up for this one, though there's plenty of shocking twists and turns in the story that should definitely catch you off guard. I'd go as far as saying that the first chapter or introduction to this game is by far my favorite in the series. The cast of ultimates this time around are also well written with good depth to them. There weren't any characters that particularly felt significantly weak compared to the rest of the cast, unlike prior entries in the series. With that said, some of the twists and turns in this game are pretty controversial writing. Controversial both in the sense of PC, but that's not new to the Danganronpa series, but more controversial in the sense for fans of the series. You'll either love or hate where this story goes. Regardless, the rest of the story was a great experience to go through, even though it did cause me to yell and wake up some neighbors at 3 in the morning often. Also, Melissa, I am sorry about that. There's a ton of refinement and new additions to the gameplay in Danganronpa V3 as compared to the rest of the series. Yes, it's still primarily a visual novel at heart, but it's way more interactive than ever before. It feels like it's more of a typical video game than a visual novel at this point when you compare it to the rest of the entries. Gameplay is still split into 2 categories: everyday school life and the murder investigation/trials. When you are investigating a murder, you're a typical student just going to the academy. You can wander and explore the halls of the school. You can also go about looking for hidden Monokuma, something back from the second Danganronpa game. Moving around desks and tables will occasionally earn you some coins that you could then spend on presents and items at the school store. You could then use these items in your bonds and relationships with other ultimates. It's almost like a simpler version of the social links in the Persona series. Talking to and hanging out with other ultimates will give you a bit of backstory to their character along with their motivations. As characters begin to grow closer, you can give them gifts to further that bond, and these bonds will come in handy later in the second category of gameplay. You can review your relationship bonds along with other information like the fast travel map using the Monopad. The Monopad is this game's version of the school handbook. Traditionally, the non-trial gameplay is pretty laid back with just a lot of walking and talking, but that really starts to kick up during the investigation and trial phases. Once a murder is discovered, it's time to investigate and look for evidence. You'll explore the school looking for evidence of what exactly occurred, in what order it occurred, as well as how the murder happened. Usually this consists of you examining the dead body, investigating the murder scene for any traces of evidence left behind by the Blacken. Additionally, you'll talk to the other remaining ultimates, gathering information and alibis for that day. Once your investigation is concluded, it's time for the class trial. This is probably the biggest change to the gameplay in the series. It's still a similar setup to previous games, though it's way longer. For my friends and I who play the series, it was a typical joke for us to say that trials were at least 1 hour long, but the smallest trials in Danganronpa V3 typically took me 2.5 to 3 hours long to complete. There's way more sections to them now. As the trial starts, all the evidence will be laid out and discussions will start to flow as to who people think the murderer is. As the player, you'll use your truth bullets, aka the evidence you found during your investigation, to refute any weak arguments with flaws in them. Slowly you'll begin to narrow down the culprits. On top of the traditional truth bullet gameplay, new trial mechanics such as lies have been introduced in this entry. While previous games in the series focus on finding the truth, V3 shows that sometimes lying is a necessity to finding the deeper truth. Heck, there is even an ultimate that brags about how much he loves to lie. This mechanism works similar to truth bullets. You load up a truth bullet and then hold a button that changes the meaning of the truth bullet to the opposite of what it means. The line doesn't necessarily mean there's multiple different outcomes, but it does guide the conversation to the truth while also providing some interesting reactions and interactions between the characters. At times, the group of ultimates will be at a standstill, split between the sides, introducing us to a scrum debate. Here, the character has to match up topics of conversation together between the two groups of characters, and it has to be in the correct order. It's an interesting mechanic because now you're not only arguing as the main character, but also as an entire group of characters. It's one of my favorite new changes to the trial system. There's also moments of panic where multiple characters are talking all at the same time, giving you different weak arguments, and you have to choose which truth bullet will actually be the right one and which character's argument you actually have to challenge. There also are mini games included in the trial, both old ones and new ones. For example, Hangman's Gambit is back from previous entries, but also new minigames like a platformer one, a driving one, and a music rhythm one. I'm purposely being as vague and showing as little of it as possible. They definitely do add some gameplay variety to the trials while also providing a bit of challenge. Outside of the Despair Death Road minigame, the rest of the minigames are pretty fair in the amount of challenge they provide. Danganronpa V3 is the first main title Danganronpa game to be released on consoles at launch, and it also shows it's definitely one of the prettier looking games in the series, for series standards of course. The design of the academy filled with overgrowth looks really cool, especially with the new areas unlocked after completing trials. The entire world is in 3D while the characters are in 2D, and it gives that gameplay a very cool art style. That's one thing V3 definitely nails, the art style and aesthetic. Very much like Persona 5, it may not be the most realistic looking game, but it really does have charm to it. The way different camera angles sort of break into the perspective during trials really does stand out, giving reactions and interactions between characters more of an impact. The real iffy thing for me was the CGI use for certain cutscenes. Sometimes it worked perfectly when death scenes and general cutscenes use it to really show emotional impact, and other times it just seemed oddly out of place, like I didn't need that particular moment animated. Most of the time though, the game is visually pleasing, especially with the new cast of characters. Their designs and costumes really give life to the cast. Speaking of giving life to the cast, let's talk about the audio because dialogue is a big part of the cast. Depending on the moment, sometimes you'll get fully voiced dialogue and other times you'll get short phrases that go along with the entire conversation. There are definitely moments where these short phrases tend to become quite repetitive. I think that's sort of a staple for the series at this point, and it's definitely still here. It's pretty noteworthy though when there are fully voiced conversations, and usually they're very close and personal ones that make the conversations only more important. Varying on whether you enjoy the English or Japanese cast, you'll be happy to hear that you actually have the option to choose which one you want to play as, and you can actually change this mid-game. As for music, you'll hear plenty of familiar and very memorable tracks from earlier entries in the series. They're really catchy to listen to along with the new tracks, although there are a few exceptions where sometimes the lyrics in a song will play mid-scene and sort of become more distracting than enjoyable. Luckily, most of the songs are great, with standouts being the ones that played during trials. They're incredibly fitting for the thrilling gameplay. Danganronpa V3 is an interesting installment for the series. It certainly does provide great twists and turns throughout the story that kept me at the edge of my seat yelling at the TV. There were many times where I was completely sure who the murderer was in a trial, only to get my butt handed to me by the game and have my whole thought process flip upside down. The trials in V3 are much longer than the other games in the series, and it's a good and bad thing. The fact that they're longer can feel like sometimes it drags on for a bit, but to play devil's advocate, most of the time I felt like that, I thought I knew who the murderer was mid-trial, only to be proven wrong about an hour later. Luckily, the new trial mechanics and minigames add a bit of variety, padding to the trials that keep the trials from feeling like they're dragging. The new cast of characters are memorable and likable, and while I definitely like some more than others, I didn't really feel like any particular character really sucked as compared to the rest of the cast. Ultimately, I think that Danganronpa V3 is a solid entry in the murder mystery series, though I think its story and its effects on the series as a whole will leave players, specifically fans of the series, divided. Whichever side you're on that equation, I think you'll enjoy most of the ride to the end at least. For the people watching this review that haven't played any of the other numbered series, you should definitely go back and play them. You can still technically play most of V3 without playing the prior games, but the effects it leaves on the series as a whole just won't be as impactful or meaningful without that prior knowledge. That's our review of Danganronpa V3 for the PS4, PlayStation Vita, and PC. If you have any questions I may have missed in the review, feel free to ask me in the comment section down below. I'm sorry if I was a bit too vague with the review because I'm just trying to avoid spoilers. I know how many people hate when people spoil a game like this that's so completely story driven, so I'm doing my best to avoid that while also be somewhat in depth with the gameplay. Regardless, if you enjoyed this review, please let me know by hitting that like button. It definitely helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. If you'd like to see more content just like this, then consider subscribing. I do reviews on PS4, Xbox One, Nintendo Switch, and PC. Thank you all for being some awesome viewers, and keep on gaming.